All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to City Club Missoula's May Forum, Destination Stewardship. How can we keep from loving Montana to death? My name is Brett Rosenberg, and I have the privilege of serving as chair of the City Club Missoula's Board of Directors, and I am delighted to see that so many people have joined us here today. City Club's mission, as you know, is to bring people together to inform and inspire on issues vital to the community through public forums that encourage the discussion of new ideas and the free exchange of thought. We have a deep commitment to civility and civil discourse, even when we discuss challenging issues. Before I introduce our moderator, I need to provide some thank yous. Thanks so much to the University of Montana and Alex Karklins for making these virtual forums happen so effectively. Also, thanks to Missoula Community Access Television, which records our forums as part of their media assistance grants to nonprofit organizations. MCAT serves our community on cable channels 189 and 190, and you can also find past videos of CCM forums by clicking on the video button on our website, cityclubmissoula.com. Thanks also to our other sponsors, in particular those at the executive level. In addition to the university, they are Blackfoot Communications and First Security Bank. Our executive level sponsors are key partners in helping to expand audience access and reliably planning and conducting our monthly forums. We also like to highlight some other sponsors every month. So today we want to recognize Montana Public Radio and the Rasmussen Law Offices. We're grateful to our diverse sponsors, and we invite you to join them by going to our website, cityclubmissoula.com. And of course, thanks to our board of directors and our administrator, Danny Howlett. City Club Missoula would also like to acknowledge that we're in the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispel people, some of whom are with us at this forum today. We honor the path that they have always shown us in caring for this place and for the generations to come. Our moderator for today's panel is Justin Engel. He's a professor of marketing and a Poe Family Distinguished Faculty Fellow at the University of Montana. He earned his PhD and MBA from the Michael G. Foster School of Business at the University of Washington. He did his undergraduate studies at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Justin is also creator and host of the College of Business podcast and Montana Public Radio program, A New Angle. In 2021, he released Fireline, a 6-part podcast about what wildfires mean for the West, our planet, and our way of life. When not teaching, doing research, or chasing his 2 daughters around, Justin is a competitive endurance athlete and product tester for Patagonia. Justin will introduce our panelists, and I will see you all at the break, roughly at 12:15, at which point we'll open the forum to questions from the audience. All right, Justin, over to you.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks for having me today. It's my honor to not only participate in City Club, but to introduce our 4 amazing panelists today. So let's just get right into it. We have Sarah Lundstrom. She's based in Whitefish, where she serves as Glacier Program Manager for the National Parks Conservation Association. Her work is focused in and around Glacier National Park and throughout the greater crown of the continent. Recently, much of her work has been facilitating and participating in collaborative processes on the Flathead National Forest, including the Whitefish Range Partnership. Sarah has lived and worked in the Flathead Valley for a decade and brings local knowledge of the people and the land to her work at NPCA. Prior to living in Montana, Sarah spent time in the desert Southwest, graduating from Utah State University and then working for the Sierra Club in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Next, we have Racine Freidi. She is the president and CEO of Glacier Country Tourism, a position she has held for 15 years. Racine has played an active role in helping to make tourism one of the 2 top industries in the state of Montana. In addition to leading one of Montana's largest destination marketing, management, and stewardship organizations, Racine is actively involved with Tourism Matters to Montana, Voices of Montana Tourism, and Destinations International. Racine grew up in Ovando at the southern end of the crown of the continent, an upbringing that helped establish her inherent love for Big Sky country. She has a bachelor's degree in communications from Montana State University and has spent the majority of her professional career promoting travel and tourism to Montana. After Racine comes Doug Mitchell. Doug is the executive director of the Glacier National Park Conservancy, where he and his colleagues work to preserve Glacier for generations to come. Prior to joining the Conservancy, Doug served as deputy director to the Montana Department of Commerce, managing director to the Montana Land Reliance, Montana Chief of Staff of Senator Max Baucus, and Chief Deputy Secretary of State here in Montana. Doug is a graduate of Stanford University with degrees in political science and economics. He's an avid runner, hiker, and reader, and serves on the board of the Montana Budget and Policy Center. And our fourth panelist is Gia Randono, co-owner with her husband Wayne Fairchild of Lewis and Clark Travel Adventures. She is a river outfitter and adventure travel guide together with 4 generations of family history in Great Falls, where she grew up. She has a bachelor's degree in business and economics from the University of Montana. Lewis and Clark Trail Adventures leads historically focused active excursions in Montana and Idaho, as well as Cuba and Mexico, paddling the Missouri River breaks, the Lochsaw, Salmon, and Clark Fork rivers, hiking the Lolo Trail, and exploring history and culture. Gia is also a realtor, drawn to the profession by a desire to help first-time homeowners, including many of the guides working in her business. Those are our 4 panelists. We'll kick it off with Sarah. Sarah, thank you.
Thank you. Give me 30 seconds while I share my screen here because, we can't have that set up already. So just a quick background on NPCA. The National Parks Conservation Association was formed in 1919 by the first director of the Park Service to be an independent voice for national parks and to protect them from threats both internal and external, and to build support for new parks across the country. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of sort of the national scope, but it's going to be pretty glacier focused since this is where I work. And also, I always like to start out talking about the Organic Act, which tells what the National Park Service and therefore national parks are tasked with, and you see it there, to conserve the scenery and the natural and historic objects and the wildlife therein, and to provide for the enjoyment of the same in such manner and by such means as will leave them unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. There's become an increasing tension between protecting park resources and visitor experience and the number of people coming to visit national parks. The question has become, how do we protect park resources in a variety of experiences, including quiet backcountry solitude in the face of ever-growing visitation, while also increasing the diversity of park visitors? Nationwide park visitation has been trending upwards for decades. Between just 2006 and 2016, parks saw a 21% increase. Post-Park Service Centennial in 2016, visitation stayed high, as you can see on this graph. Glacier saw its record year in 2017 with 3.3 million visitors. In 2020, system-wide, 240 million people visited national parks. So that's in the start of the pandemic. But unfortunately, all those people are not spread equally. Half of those 240 million visitors occurred in just 23 of the most visited parks, which means just 6% of parks in the national park system hosted 120 million visitors. That multi-year increase in visitation at some parks and park destinations and the concurrent impacts to resources and the visitor experience is probably one of the greatest challenges facing the national park system in its second century. As an example, using Glacier, this is what COVID did to us. You see this graph. Blue is 2019, which is a pretty typical year of visitation, with the peak being in July and August. Orange is 2020, when Glacier was closed late March through mid-June and open with limited access as all of the east side entrances remain closed. You can see visitation rebounded by the fall and actually was at above 2019 levels, and that the park set monthly visitation records relatively frequently from October 2020 to March of 21. And then gray is 2021, where visitation has come back. It's typical of a normal visitation year. Those spring levels were higher and they stay high into the fall. Just as another example, in 2021, Zion had a record year of visitation with 5 million visitors. At the same time, Great Smoky Mountains had 14+ million people come through that door. And Yellowstone had its first ever month of visitation over 1 million people. And think about this. This was at a time when international travel was almost non-existent. And it's not just the increase in visitation that we've seen, not just because of COVID, but because of the Park Service Centennial. Climate change, extended shoulder seasons, shrinking off seasons, and growing remote work opportunities means many parks are likely to continue to see increasing visitation in the coming years. It's also an increase in visits because of social media influencers, the so-called selfie generation, and new forms of recreation like pack rafts and e-bikes. And then visitor experience expectations are also changing when it comes to things like internet access and cell phone service in parks. And all of these changes impact how, when, and why people are coming to parks. And so we're seeing impacts in diminished visitor experience due to traffic congestion, lack of interaction with rangers, long lines for basic services, and a loss of quiet and solitude. We're seeing public health and safety and life safety concerns because of human waste, incident response time, and road and parking lot rage in some parks. And then natural and cultural resource degradation. 2020 particularly saw increases in graffiti, dogs in parks, litter, social trails, wildlife displacement, and camping in closed locations. And then finally, we're seeing impacts to park staff and the infrastructure. Staffing retention is difficult. There are increasing stresses on park staff. There's increasing search and rescue needs. There's damage to park infrastructure and wear and tear on trails, roads, buildings, and historic structures. We're also seeing impacts on neighboring public lands because that overflow visitation from national parks is going on in places like the Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, and state parks, and to smaller national park sites that aren't necessarily prepared for the number of visitors that they're now seeing. You know, we're seeing dispersed camping and the accompanied problems, again, like human waste and social trails and food and garbage storage. And a lot of these agencies are understaffed. They don't have as many resources. They don't have the budget. They don't have the facilities to deal with the increasing visitation that they're seeing, nor can their law enforcement keep up with enforcement and with outreach. And finally, we're seeing safety issues because of places like here, you know, in Bear Country, people don't know how to store their food right. They don't know how to store their garbage, or they're camping right next to busy roads. And then finally, we're seeing impacts to communities, partly a visitor experience for people coming to our communities because of traffic congestion, long lines for services, closed restaurants, things like that. And then quality of life impacts for residents because of those crowded parks, crowded trails, crowded restaurants, congested roads, and other issues in the community. And then affordable housing, which probably doesn't need to actually be mentioned at this point anymore, but it is an issue. It's also a problem with both the park and restaurants and businesses being able to recruit and retain staff. And finally, we're seeing changes in community character, partly because these places are desirable and people are buying up second and maybe third homes and not staying there all the time. And then it's also causing an increase in cost of living for folks that are here. So this picture came directly off of Glacier's website. I don't know if folks have seen this before. I think it leads to a question. How do we want our visits to parks and public lands to look in the future? You know, it's a question we're all going to have to answer. In the meantime, parks across the country are already trying out some ideas to change what those visits look like and maybe make reality look a little bit more like Instagram. Rocky Mountain Yosemite in 2020 started reservation systems. Arches has implemented a timed entry system this year. Zion has reservations to hike Angel's Landing, and Shenandoah you have to have reservations to hike Old Reg. You know, those are just a few examples, but there's a lot of stuff that's going on across the country in terms of communications and messaging and transportation with shuttles, changing how people get into and out of parks. Glacier's used some of those tools, like the recreation access display that they've had for a long time that gives live updates on status of campgrounds and parking lots, and the one in, one out access at Polbridge that we've seen before. And the pilot of the reservation system about last year and then this summer on the Going to the Sun Road and now Polbridge is just another tool in the toolbox. So all of these things change how we visit, but we're still seeing a lot of folks coming. You know, the last piece of the puzzle of that is studying the impacts of the actions that the Park Service is taking or that land management agencies are taking, like the reservation system and how it impacts people and resource protection. And we partnered with Utah State University researchers last summer to do a study on visitor experience with the reservation system in Glacier. And the results of that are going to be out at the end of this month. But preliminarily, what it said was 70% of people favored a reservation system on the Going to the Sun Road. And they wanted to see something like that in the future. So we're also partnering with those same researchers to do the same study in Arches because their timed entry system is different than Glacier's ticketed entry system. And we want to be able to compare what works better and how that effectively, you know, whether it moves the visitors more effectively, things like that. So that's what I've got for you. Hopefully it gives a little bit of an idea of what's going on out there. Like I said, mostly Glacier focused, but it gives us an idea nationally that this is not us alone. And hopefully, you know, a little bit of ideas locally as we start talking about some solutions.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Sarah. Next, we have Racine Freidi. Take it away, Racine.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen? Okay, well, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this really great panel. Today, I want to share a little bit about the evolution of destination organizations like Glacier Country Tourism and what we've been experiencing in the last several years, specifically the last two, as it speaks directly to our conversation today about how we can keep from loving Montana to death. There we go. First, a little bit about Glacier Country Tourism. We're the officially recognized destination marketing organization for Western Montana, and that includes the Flathead, Glacier, Lake, Lincoln, Mineral, Missoula Valley, and Sanders counties. We're funded by the Lodging Facility Use Tax, which is one of the two bed taxes in the state of Montana. Since the Lodging Facility Use Tax was created by the Montana legislature in 1987, our organization has been following the mandate of the legislature by working to promote our 75 plus communities as an attractive travel destination. Now, before COVID, most DMOs in Montana, and frankly, destinations across the world mostly did destination marketing. And destination marketing organizations promote a community as an attractive travel destination and enhances its public image as a dynamic place to live and visit. In recent years, we have been transitioning to destination management organizations, which develops partnerships with various organizations and stakeholders to support a strong tourism economy and quality visitor experiences. Today, though, many are evolving towards destination stewardship. And destination stewardship organizations begin with a community-first mindset, support creating a thriving tourism economy that addresses community priorities while protecting and supporting a destination's unique assets. Back in 1987, tourism was practically non-existent in our state. Our primary mission was to stimulate the economy by bringing in tourist dollars. And beginning around 2016, as Glacier National Park started to see heavy visitation numbers in the summer, we pivoted towards messaging that increased awareness of what there was to see outside the park and helped to disperse visitors to areas who had capacity for more visitors. We also placed more emphasis on shoulder season promotions. In 2020, rural America saw this influx of visitors as people looked to escape the pandemic in search of destinations with wide open spaces and low population densities. Outdoor recreation became that activity of choice, both for experienced and novice recreationists. And Western Montana became one of the many top destinations. We started to hear from our communities all about these people. Businesses didn't have enough employees to operate at pre-COVID capacity. There were lots of workforce issues, and employees were having a really hard time finding housing. That's when Glacier Country Tourism's board set its eye on destination stewardship and the process behind it. The destination stewardship process involves working with people who live and work in our communities to maintain the cultural, environmental, economic, and aesthetic integrity of the destination. Glacier Country Tourism started this process last fall and just wrapped up the community engagement phase last week, which included 16 community town hall meetings across our 8 counties, 2 surveys, one for residents, one for stakeholders, 11 focus groups, and many one-on-one interviews. This week, we are taking what we learned to begin shaping our 10-year strategic plan. This strategy is all about protecting the very qualities that make Western Montana first and foremost a wonderful place to live, with the added benefit of being a wonderful place to visit. What we heard loud and clear was that the ideal visitor should respect the lifestyle we residents treasure. They should be seeking to enjoy the experiences that we have and value our natural resources and the people who call Glacier Country home. They should also provide financial value to our local communities without sacrificing the aforementioned. At the beginning of 2021, Glacier Country Tourism dramatically changed our messaging from promoting the region to new visitors to educating people who had an intent to travel here and to speak to those who are already here to recreate responsibly. Today, everything we do now includes a message around recreate responsibly. Here's our current non-resident campaign message, encouraging people to treasure Western Montana and recreate responsibly, for it's not just a place to visit for their vacation, it's our home. Visitors are directed to our recreateresponsiblymt.com landing page, where they learn more about recreating responsibly, what that means, and literally how to do it. I do want to wrap up by sharing the economic impact numbers from 2021 from the Institute for Tourism and Recreation Research. Last year, 12.5 million non-resident visitors traveled to Montana. They spent $5.15 billion in direct expenditures, which is new money for Montana's economy. Approximately 1/3 of those were in the Glacier Country region. Travel and tourism directly supported almost 48,000 jobs, resulting in $1.3 billion in associated labor income, and contributed $387 million in state and local taxes. Thank you, and I'm going to hand it off to our next panelist.
So thank you very much, Racine. Doug Mitchell is up next.
Well, thanks very much, Justin. And just for planning purposes, never get scheduled to follow Sarah Lundstrom and Racine. It's not an enviable position. It is such a delight for me to be able to work with them, and I've been able to work with Racine specifically for more time. As she talked about being a DMO at the Department of Commerce, that was kind of one of our jobs, right? Was to figure out how to get the most bang for the buck, right, for tourism dollars, and that ended up being advertised to parks. And so when I took this job in 2017, I had to go into the superintendent's office, and he was looking at a visitation sheet that said, we might actually go over 3 million visitors. And I said, well, you're welcome, and I'm really sorry. Because our job at the Conservancy is a different job, right? I mean, we try and all be good at our jobs, and at Commerce and Racine and the other DMOs, we were good at our job, which is to get the most bang for the buck for taxpayers for the bed tax dollars that are spent. As we have reached some capacity issues, which began in kind of 2017 when I took this job, that conversation has become a little bit different. So that's kind of what I want to talk a little bit about today, and to kind of maybe encourage some tough questions as we look at this tough problem. So who is the Glacier National Park Conservancy? Great question. It's the best nonprofit you've never heard of. Most national parks have friends organizations. At the Glacier Conservancy, we do two things. We run the bookstores inside the park. Federal government doesn't sell stuff, so they rely on a nonprofit to do that for them, and then we feed that money back to work in the park. And then we just straight up raise money for the park. Those of you who have your Glacier license plate, thank you very much. That was kind of the first thing that the Glacier Fund did when it became an organization 20 years ago, was launch one of their very first Montana specialty plates. And it really has been interesting to watch the growth of the Glacier Conservancy because of the needs of Glacier National Park. So to go back to what Sarah said, and to kind of suss out a little bit about the Organic Act, right? The Organic Act says two things: keep it the same and make sure people can enjoy it. Well, this is kind of a challenge, right? And so in 2011, Glacier National Park had 1.85 million visitors and a budget of $12 million. Okay, 1.85 million visitors, $12 million. 2017, Glacier National Park had 3.3 million visitors and a budget of, you guessed it, $12 million. So how do you think through you squeeze a balloon, it's got to squeeze out somewhere else, right? That's just the way it is. So to some extent, the Glacier Conservancy is where that balloon squeezes out, right? We've all been to the park. You drive to the park, very nice person at the gate hands you a newspaper. You would be inclined to think that that would be printed by the federal government. You would not be correct. We pay for and print 2 million of those a year because, just straight up, the park doesn't have any money to do it, because they've had to allocate their still the same amount of money. And to be honest, it's a little bit more now. It's more like $13 million now. But they've had to lean on their nonprofit partner to do more. How much more? Well, in 2011, the then Glacier Fund was able to give the park $300,000 in money to do park projects. Tomorrow, what day is it? Monday. On Wednesday, our grants committee will have requests from Glacier Park for $4.85 million worth of support for projects they can't do in the park without private money. right? So this is really a game changer. And some of those are great, exciting projects that are easy to fundraise for. Native America Speaks, an incredible 40th year, longest Indigenous People Speaker Series in a national park. Something we should be super proud of. People love to support it. But portalets at many glacier entry stations, so when people can't get in, they have a place to go to the bathroom, that's a little tougher ask. So we are also having, as the nonprofit partner, some discussions about what is the threshold for what we can support and how does that impact the Organic Act and our job, really, which we see, our mission is simple: preserve and protect Glacier Park for future generations. Hard stop, right? How does supporting Wi-Fi at West Glacier, how does the portalets, which we do a number of, how does printing a publication, environmental group, maybe that's off message, how do those things work in terms of that long-term mission of helping preserve and protect Glacier National Park for future generations? So we have tough choices, right? We want the vehicle reservation system to work. We want it to work really well. Do we have enough money to push through to do that? Is that the right thing for us to do? These are really hard discussions that we're having, that our donors, frankly, have with us to say, how do we continue? So I'm excited to be here today to answer questions, and I hope that we are able to maybe find some good solutions together.
Super. Thank you, Doug. Our final panelist today is Gia Randono. Take the floor.
Hello. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here and speak with you all and answer any questions you might have. A little bit of background about our business. Here, I'll try to do my screen share. That's okay. So locally, what we focus our business on is the Alberton Gorge of the Clark Fork is probably where we have most of our trips. And then we also do the Blackfoot and then trips through town. And just speaking to everyone's data on the increase in use, we have been pretty steady. We've seen an increase, but maybe not to the degree that reflects the general increase in tourism. I think where we've seen an increase is probably in just your private river users. And so what we try to do in our part to minimize impact is, one, because we're outfitters on the Salmon River and the Missouri, which are wild and scenic and wilderness areas, we practice and promote leave no trace camping and using of our natural resources. And then one thing that we notice is that a lot of the increase in traffic and user conflicts and just congestion happens at the river access points more than on the river. So how we're helping with that is we consolidate transportation by, our guests get on a bus or a van versus having, all their own personal vehicles there. So we really try to help consolidate congestion at those places. And so I'm happy to answer any questions you have about what our experience is and how the tourism is reflected in our clientele and our guests, and also anything as that relates to real estate as well, because I've been a realtor for 16 years, and I do love helping first-time home buyers, and that is a bit challenging these days, but I have some statistics that I can share about the housing market, which you're all probably curious about and monitoring as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Gia. I guess I'll kick it off with a question, and you probably each have sort of a different approach to this, but each one of you described very hard trade-offs, right? You're trying to solve multiple problems that are sometimes in conflict, access and promotion, things like that. So in your respective spheres, what are the one or two things that you find are working as effective solutions to the trade-offs you're trying to make? Sarah, do you want to kick it off?
Only if I have a couple seconds to think about this. That's a hard question to answer right now because, as an advocate for the Park Service, which is essentially what our organization does, we're in a new world when we're talking about things like reservation systems and seeing the crowding that we're seeing in parks. Like, nobody knows how to do this because nobody's done it before. And so I think, that's where learning, like trying things and learning from them, and then maybe trying something a little bit different or trying something the same, I think is really important. And I think, the Park Service has really started to become more adaptable, and really starting to do that. Unfortunately, as Doug pointed out with his numbers, their budgets don't go up very much year to year. And so I think, where we're finding we can partner with folks like the Conservancy to help fund research projects, some social science, because honestly, people are like the number one not studied animal in parks at this point. And so I really feel like it's that partnership, it's trying new things, and it's honestly building this plane as we're flying it to some degree when it comes to crowding and visitation.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. Doug, you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think, Sarah's exactly right. I think one of the key things is analysis, right? That, my wife grew up in Kalispell. We've been hiking here in the park together for 40, I don't know how many years. And people will tell you two things about the shuttle system. It's terrible and they've never taken it, right? So we need to find out some facts. So analysis, I think, is really critical. And we've been able to do a number of studies with Carnegie Mellon University, with Kellogg, Chicago School of Business on transportation. How would a shuttle system work? How many buses would you need? What are the actual facts about hiker demand for shuttles and things like that? So I think you asked, what are a couple things that are working? One is getting the facts, right? So I think Sarah gave you something in a fact, which is 70% of people think there should be a reservation system, which is not what we think here, right? Go out on the street and you're not going to think that that's what people think, right? So first of all, let's get the facts and let's do the analysis. But number two, what works really quickly for me is education. And that's, the small e and big E, right? That we all bring our experiences with us from wherever we're coming. And in Glacier, make no mistake that it's not us, it's them, right? 3 million people would be each of us visiting 3 times a year, and that's not happening. So people bring those with us. But when they are asked to think just even a little more deeply about this question of why did I have to wait at the gate, then it's almost immediate that they get it, right? Yosemite has come up with a great phrase, which, by the way, they trademarked, so we can't use it. Reserve today, preserve tomorrow. And I almost think it's as simple as that, right? Do you think when you talk to people and you say, well, wait a minute, would you really like for there to be parking beside the road in the ditch and on the natural environment? Oh, well, that's probably a bad idea. Oil leaks and fires and it's that quick, right? But you need to be truthful, right? We can't make up the sky is falling things, right? We have to be truthful about the analytics and the science, and then we have to be educators. And again, that's hard because that's not where, when I was at Commerce, we didn't get money to educate people about Montana. We got money to sell them on Montana. So we are asking for a policy change to think about that. And Senator Daines and Senator King have a bill right now to talk about gateway communities and to think about research in a different way than we've talked about in the past. So those are the two things for me: analytics and education.
Racine or Gia, do you have thoughts on these trade-offs and what you've been finding as effective solutions?
Yeah, you bet. There's 3 things in particular that we feel are really important. One is the education piece. And because We are the ones who are already talking to those people before they come. We're not hiding the message about recreating responsibly. We're putting it right out there in front. It's attached to the ads. It's attached to the landing page. We're really not being shy about it. The other piece of the puzzle is hitting people while they're here. And whether it's billboards or table tents or rack cards, you name it, we're really trying to get the message out on the ground, which is actually something we were not allowed to do 2.5 years ago. We were not allowed to message in region. And since COVID, we've been able to show the importance of us being able to do that, which is great. And I agree with that. Data analytics research, we are investing heavily in tools that are not only helping us, but we're offering up to some of our partners. In fact, we're doing a big, huge research project with Glacier National Park this year. So those are the three things I see.
Super, thank you. Gia, how about you? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I do. Where we operate on the Salmon River and the Missouri and the Loxaw, we do have to adhere to limits as to number of people that we can take. And so in Montana, I feel like there's a bit of a struggle with, we want to keep it open and make it available to everyone. But we work really closely with our land management, land managers, river managers, and they're collecting data. And as they see these increases, maybe it's not such a bad thing to have a permit, maybe not for the day use around Missoula, but in some other areas that are seeing, high impact, it does work, and we're used to operating that way, and it does mean that we have to operate at a capacity, not with unlimited numbers, and I think that working closely with our river managers, it does help reduce the impact.
Super. Another question that occurs to me as I listen to the four of you describe your work is, one of the things we want with recreation is for people to, come to these wonderful places and have great experiences and great memories and bond with their family or their loved ones or whatever that looks like. But there's this other added motive, that is, if they come and enjoy these places and appreciate the natural beauty, that they will be a part of the preservation of these resources for others in the future. And presumably we'd like that ethic of stewardship to sort of, for folks to take that back to their communities. When you're thinking about that, how are you thinking about opening up this opportunity to as many people as possible? Not everybody can log on to the navigate the registration system or the reservation system early enough. Not everybody has the funds or the means or the time off to get here. How are you thinking about creating sort of equality of opportunity in terms of access to these great resources? Anybody want to jump in with that? I know it's a big question, but if you have thoughts, maybe Sarah, we can put you on the spot. Actually, I put you on the spot once already. Doug, why don't I put you on the spot first?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting, and it's an interesting time to ask that question, right? As we're all on Zoom today. And that has been an interesting discovery, right? I'm 61, so I'm old. But I have watched the social media pieces of this really be important. And I'll use social media in a broad term, and in a couple of different ways. Sarah showed a picture of a social media post, and part of that's problematic, right? You have bad behavior happening because somebody leaned over the edge of something to take a selfie and somebody else did and they fell off, right? But it also is a really interesting opportunity to be an educator for people who are not here. And we've taken that seriously. There's a responsibility to that. So, we like to post pretty pictures on our Instagram and our Facebook, but you have to think, are you too close to an animal when you took that picture? Should you educate about that you use a telephoto lens? Is this a landscape that people be standing where this picture was taken, right? Is it in a native environment? So I think part of this is thinking about how to properly utilize what is the reality today of social media. And we have also had really interesting, great success. By need, we have had to start communicating with our members digitally. I started a Glacier book club during the pandemic. It's become extremely popular, and people from all over the country who can't get here for one reason or the other, but want to talk about Glacier can participate. We have a thing called Glacier Conversations, where again, we'll pick a topic. We'll have somebody come and challenge us on a topic, just like we're doing here today. And to be able to have that conversation. I hosted a public meeting, or I guess a forum, with the superintendent about the reservation system, right? We had 150 or 200 people. So I think, this ability to educate using Al Gore's interweb is really an interesting opportunity to think about trying to give access and, again, education to people who might not be walking through the gate.
Super. Others with thoughts on these trade-offs?
I think that's a great question, and I think Doug's answer definitely hit part of it. I think the other question about that, particularly reservation systems, and we just saw coming out of the University of Montana the study that showed that reservations for camping and campgrounds is it's not equitable across the board for people to be able to do that. There's certainly concern that that's going to hold true with reservation systems for parks. I think there's a lot of creativity out there going on right now. We saw in Yosemite, the Friends group of Yosemite created Spanish language instructions for people for how to get reservations, because they have a very large Hispanic population down that direction. I think there's some opportunity there. I think there's some great opportunity within the Park Service website and the federal government itself in terms of like recreation.gov, which is where you have to go to get your reservations, is only available in English, which is a problem, when you're starting to think about this. So I think there's a lot of things that could be done. We're really exploring language translations for explaining to people how to get reservation systems. I think the other piece is what the Park Service has done itself with how they've built those reservation programs, where you're opening up some tickets for availability far in advance. I think it's 120 days in advance, something like that. So those people that can plan can get their tickets and know that they have a ticket to get into the park. But then there's also a reserve left over for those people that maybe can't plan when they're going to have a day off, or they work in the service industry where their day offs change from, week to week, things like that. So that it gives them the ability to do that as well. So some of it's in how we build these systems. If we're taking into account the idea that we want to make sure that there is broad opportunity, then it's how we build those systems. It's how we market and message things, and potentially in other languages. I think it's a question, and that's a question that we're struggling with as an organization, and I think the Park Service is struggling with as a whole. Is like, here we are restricting access to some national parks during certain time periods. At the same time, we're trying to broaden the number of people and the diversity of people coming to parks, because if you don't diversify, what's going to happen over the long haul. So I think we're still answering that question, and I think we'll be answering that question for a long time.
Yeah, it seems like a perpetual challenge. Racine or Gia, do you have any thoughts on this topic?
We've really been trying to expand our collaborations and our partnerships. And when the ticketed entry came out last year, we were working with them and meeting with them almost on a weekly basis at the prompt of our partners at Discover Kalispell. And they had all these different partners, public land partners, everyone. And we were really starting to address, what are the challenges? What are the things that people are asking? What are the how do we get that message out there? And so one of the things that Glacier Country did is we created a landing page that was park, and we were trying to increase awareness of the things to do outside the park, and not just within 30 miles. We're talking, 100 miles outside the park. And then also working with our other public land agencies on making sure we have accurate information and then we're not creating more problems in some of the areas that they were concerned about. But again, messaging is key, but also working together on making sure all of our messaging is in alignment and we're all saying the same thing and supporting each other.
Yeah, I was just reading through some of the questions, and so as river outfitters, as I was saying, we are managed and we're monitored as far as our group size and things like that. But I'm a big proponent of keeping it open, the private boaters and public, the non-outfitted public, private users, keeping it open. I was a couple of years ago, I was on a committee with the Missoula Downtown Association and some people to talk about how to manage the traffic flow of the tubers and the people floating through downtown Missoula and some other cities that I've visited. I feel like there are ways, I don't really have the answer, but there are ways that we can sort of monitor the flow, the traffic flow, without having to restrict access, that can, I think, really help enhance not just the visitors, but I feel like a lot of, local Missoulians like to get out and enjoy these places too. And so where we used to be able to just drive our car to the put-in and leave it there and not worry about the congestion so much, that we all have to kind of adjust how we're used to doing things in our favorite places to recreate. And that might mean using a shuttle service, carpooling more, or just, coming up with participating and complying with the things that our river managers are trying to implement so that it's better for all of us as well.
Well, speaking of questions, it's now time for audience participation and Q&A. It's pretty much the whole point of City Club, so we're going to have some of our board members behind the scenes forward your questions to Justin. As I said earlier, please avoid making statements and use the Q&A function, not the chat, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. Thank you so much.
Awesome, Brett. Some great questions coming in. Thank you, audience. Keep them coming. Let's start with a question from Laura Lundquist. She asks, the pandemic showed that the assumption that people will care if they get to enjoy places is necessarily so. Where is the proof that this is more than just a hopeful ideal? And we can go freeform. Whoever's got strong thoughts on this can jump in.
Read that one more time, Justin.
Yeah, so the assumption that if people, get to see these things, they'll love them. Has there been any proof? Is there proof that the people who are coming to these places to enjoy them are actually treating them better or taking those ideas back to their homes?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And to be honest, this is something that I know, Racine and their group are looking into. Sarah and their group, with the help of Utah State University, are looking into, what is the visitor experience, right? Is this a positive visitor experience? I'm always a little surprised as a Montanan, right, who, if we have to wait 2 cars at a stop sign, we call it rush hour. But if you're from Chicago and you wait for 30 minutes to get into Glacier Park, this doesn't raise your blood pressure at all. So what we think is an unfortunate experience doesn't register as that for other people. So I can only say anecdotally for me that people, at least in Glacier Park, who are having that Glacier Park experience are gobsmacked by it. And that's part of the problem, right? Is they go home and they tell other people that they're gobsmacked. But the rubber meets the road when you get the analytics, and that's what Sarah and NPCA have really rolled up their sleeves, to their credit. And right when we started this system, started thinking about it. So, and maybe Sarah has some thoughts about that.
Kind of. I think it is a perennially hard question, right? Like, does the idea that you have an experience then turn you into an advocate for a place because you experienced the place and loved the place? Personally, I can say yes. I in high school, went on a trip to the desert and fell in love. And I work in conservation and am an advocate for public lands. For each individual, I think it's a different question, but we, as an organization, NPCA has supporters from across the country who specifically donate money to our glacier programs to help us do work here. So, sometimes it's just a lack of understanding of how to have that impact. Like, how do you go home from a visit in Montana and advocate for Montana lands? And so I think, the organizations like ours, organizations like Doug's, others across, there are any number of friends groups across the country that provide an outlet and an avenue for folks to engage in that advocacy piece on locations where they have visited, and then they go back and they say, I really want to do something. So I think there is some truth to it, and I think there probably is more truth to it than not, but I do think that it is a question that we all ask, like, do you love this place? Okay, go back and speak for it. And then how do you know that they actually did? It's a question that we all ponder, and there's been a lot of that questioning lately. And it's not an easy question to answer.
I would have to agree. And we actually have had this conversation of, well, we have we've had our experienced recreationists, but we also have those novice recreationists as well. And we've been in a little bit of a crisis messaging mode because we're trying to educate them. They're really, really new to this, and we want to help educate them so that their visitor experience is good. They don't get themselves in trouble and they have a safe experience. But, how many actually fell in love with outdoor recreation versus how many are like, oh, I did that during the pandemic, but I'm going to go back to my urban experiences and some of those other things. Frankly, we're monitoring that. We're using a lot of our tools. We're putting the data collection and analysis to work, and hopefully we'll get a little bit better handle on this over the next couple of years as to how many people are returning and how many people did fall in love, and that's now part of their life.
So a lot of these questions kind of follow some of the similar themes, so everybody will get a chance to kind of address. But Gia, maybe we'll turn this one over to you because you think about housing and access and things like that. Question from Sherry Sable. Residents are vocal about congestion and means of abating congestion. What can residents actually do to help?
Yeah, what I was talking about earlier is using the services that are available as far as like shuttle services where you can reduce the congestion. It's hard because everyone wants to do things on the traditional days off, which is Saturday and Sunday. And so it tends to be really congested on those days. So, we always recommend maybe go out and enjoy your recreation on a Monday through Wednesday or something like that, to help sort of spread it out and reduce the use on those big days. I think we all want to go to our favorite places, and it's going to be everybody's favorite places. So we just maybe go off the beaten path, find a new favorite place in Montana. There's lots.
Right. Any other thoughts on that congestion topic?
Well, I think, thinking around the size of the spigot is also an interesting thing, right? We've all seen the airport expansions in most of our airports in Montana, and additional flights. And so part of this is maybe thinking about what is our capacity for that continued expansion, right? Again, that's not where we ever were. I was actually at dinner in 2017 when Glacier Park closed its gate for the first time ever. And that was just 2017, and I did it almost every day last year, right? So things have changed very quickly. And can we really, as individuals in the valley here, speaking from the hipster village of Columbia Falls, can individually we do something where we're fighting a flow of 750 people a day into the airport, right? So I think thinking about what is the problem of congestion, and what are we willing as communities to think about in those terms, right? Less people in the airport is less car rentals, is less dinners, is less hotel rooms. And are we willing as a community to think about that? And I think that's one of the things that, some of these things like the King Danes bill are thinking about, having those tougher discussions that gateway communities may need to think about for the first time.
So sorry, jump in, Racine.
Thanks. I think one of the things that COVID has brought about is I think people are a lot more open to creative thinking. We're a lot more open to ideas that we never would have considered before. Just as an example, us not being able to message in region prior to this, well, now we can. And there's lots of other things. We had a great conversation with a lot of our public land partners at a meeting in January. And one of them said, one thing that's great, at least at the agency level, is we know we can't do it ourselves anymore. And we need to partner. We need public-private partnerships in order to help get things done. And was really honest. He says, prior to this, that probably wouldn't have happened. We would have still kind of been in the mindset where we can handle this. But now we're just a lot more open to looking at creative solutions.
Super. The questions keep coming, so I'm just going to kind of roll through and we'll jump in with whoever feels like it's right in their wheelhouse. Luke Haydock asks, what can we do to work toward increasing funding for our public lands? Doug, maybe start there because you work with a resource that gets federal funds and you provide nonprofit funds to supplement those budgets. I mean, you're kind of working through two mechanisms. Why don't you start with your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, that's all about advocacy. And I think that, the great John Law, our lobbyist from Montana Power, used to like to say, in every piece of legislation, there's winners and losers. And the only way you get something passed is to make sure the losers don't know who they are. And I think sometimes we as advocates for public lands don't know who we are. And that's just got to stop, right? If we, I get people who don't want to give us money because they think the park should be funding it. And they're not wrong, but I don't have that choice, right? So I think being advocates to say, how are we going to properly fund these places that are being loved to death, very, very frankly, is important, and not to be shy about it, because that's again how you become the people who don't know who they are, is being shy about it. And people like NPCA, who are really strong leaders in this, and others who talk in this space, I think it's important to decide to speak up. The world's run by people who show up. And I really think that showing up is important. The National Park System is particularly difficult because it's buried underneath a bigger agency that's then in an administration. But again, that's not a good excuse for not trying. So I think this is really about making the effort and figuring out how to have that voice be heard.
I'll jump in on that too. I think Doug's absolutely correct. It is hard to get the attention of lawmakers because that's essentially, in order to increase funding for public lands, we need to get Congress to pass a bill that gives more money to public lands. That's the simplest way to do it. Luckily, we live in a place where every single one of us can contact our legislators, our congressmen, our senators. So my recommendation to everybody on this call is call your representatives, call your senators, call your state reps and state legislators for state parks and say, you know what, public lands are important and they need more money. We had a great victory a couple years ago when the Great American Outdoors Act was passed that actually increased funding for maintenance backlogs to help pick up some of the slack because, every single year there's more and more maintenance that public lands need, the infrastructure needs, and we're not meeting it with the funding that we're currently giving. So that bill increased the amount of funding to go to that backlog. It also increased funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund and made that permanent. Something like that was passed with bipartisan support from Congress goes directly to public lands, and it helps land managers deal with that. I think the other space that you are going to hear probably a lot more about recently, a lot of our conservation funding comes from bills like Pittman-Robertson, where it's a tax on sportsmen's equipment, guns, bullets, fishing gear, things like that. And there had been conversations years ago, and maybe they're starting up again, about a similar type of funding source on recreational equipment as opposed to just hunting equipment. So you're talking about, bikes and kayaks and backpacks and trekking poles and all those things. And that would be another way for people to get directly involved and to see some increased funding. But I think at the very basic, the very easiest thing to do is call your Congress people and tell them this matters.
Racine, any thoughts on this funding piece? I mean, you kind of deal across many different types of public lands. They probably all work differently with funding. How does that kind of live in your world?
Well, prior to taking this job, I would have said, "Oh no, we're not in advocacy," and that is exactly not what I would say now. We're in an advocacy job all the time, and every single time we meet with, whether it's a local legislator, state. I just got back from Washington with meeting our entire delegation there and talking about public lands and all the other issues. We have to embrace those opportunities and make sure they know what our challenges are and keep advocating for them.
And
Justin,
Gia,
if I could
jump in.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to add one thing, because Racine always is so smart. She reminds me of things. And I brought this up earlier, the state's job on bed tax, which you'll know what the money is like. It's somewhere around the $18 to $20 million a year range, which is spent to advertise Montana. And this is going to be a provocative discussion, or idea, but is this a time to think about, is part of that money, should it be set aside for stewardship, right? I felt a little bit guilty, right? When I understood the damage I was causing by being successful at my job. Right. And is there a responsibility among people who are spending money to increase impact in public spaces to set some money aside that maybe nonprofit donors shouldn't be paying for portalets at Glacier National Park? Maybe the bed tax should. Right. So there might be some other ways to think differently about money and get the same amount of money, but just put it in different pockets.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that too. One thing that's actually changing for the DMOs, because there's two lodging taxes in Montana. The first one kind of goes to the traditional DMOs and state parks and historical society and such. There's another one, also 4%, where 75% of those funds go to Montana's general fund. And so equal amounts that are being generated for both those funding pots. But also, beginning in July, we're now able to put money aside to help with destination development. And a lot of that is capacity building and working with our communities to find out what are the issues, what are the things that we can help you with. Because you don't want too much capacity that the businesses are struggling, but you don't want so many visitors beyond the capacity of the community, because then you're overwhelming the community. You've got to find the balance. And so we're hoping that moving forward, we're going to be able to do that a little bit. But of course, we can't do it alone. We have to work with our cities, our counties, our state, our nonprofit or non-government agencies, you name it. We all need to be working together. And frankly, one of the things that we hope happens moving forward is we're having those conversations at the table. We're at the table more together. We're not operating. My intent is certainly not to be having what we do being done behind the scenes anymore. We need to be at the table and having the conversations with everyone.
Yeah, that's encouraging. Let's move to the next thread of questioning, and I'll sort of target this to you, Gia, because I think it's in your wheelhouse. Well, it's in all of our wheelhouses, but let's start with you. It's a question from Ginny Miriam. She talks about the level of resentment amongst Montanans that are, grateful for the out-of-state visitors and the recreation dollars and tax dollars they bring, but there's a level of resentment there. The people that live in the state or the locals sort of want the access that they feel they deserve. How do you sort of think about that? Are there mechanisms on the table or any discussions, particularly like maybe some of the rivers that you guide on where there's permitting? Any issues to protect the locals or give locals any kind of preferential access?
Well, right now, like the rivers that we run, there's no restrictions on this access at all. So maybe that fishing outfitters that operate like on the Smith River, that's probably a big question. And right now on all the rivers that we operate, they are completely open to the general public, no matter where you're from. There's no restriction. So I'm not sure how that can be made. I don't know how that can be improved.
Sure. Okay. Maybe Doug, you could talk about it with regard to permitting and the reservation system for getting into the park.
Yeah, it's a question that has been raised a lot around here, and very directly to the park. And the park, of course, it's a national park, and it's open to everyone. It's the Wallace Stegner quote about national parks being America's best idea because they are wholly democratic, right? And so I think on a national park sense, we also would not want to have to try and go down to California and compete with everyone in San Francisco on Muir Woods or in LA with Yosemite. So I think in terms of some access for locals issue, I think we kind of have to put that aside. That's just not really going to be a reasonable expectation of the system. Where we do have access as locals, like a week ago Saturday, Julie and I took our bikes and we rode the road, going Sun Road, with, 25 other people, right? Because we're locals and we can go on a Saturday and it was decent weather and we could just decide and we could go. And the reservation system, the vehicle reservation system, you can still, as a local, go at 4:00 in the afternoon anywhere, or you can go to TUMED any day you want, or so we have to get our minds around the fact that this really, just have a namaste moment and it's okay. I think the other complicated issue, right, is what's a local. So, Julie was born. I muted myself. Julie was born in Pasadena in California, my wife, and didn't start hiking here until 1962. Is she not a local? Or are you not a local if you have a vacation home here? So this idea of kind of pitting ourselves against each other, just to me as a human, feels like the wrong place to put our emphasis. And if we can step back and say, how do we make this better for everybody? That seems to me like a healthier discussion.
Okay. Let's move to a question from Molly Stockdale. She references a conversation we had earlier about philanthropy. She's curious about the future of philanthropy in public land. How can organizations like Glacier Conservancy spark giving to smaller nonprofits like State Parks Friends groups or other community conservation organizations? So I know we're competing for philanthropy dollars here, but how do we try to support some of the smaller niche players or smaller interests as well?
I have an idea about that.
Please.
So yes, on the funding, as a provider of these outdoor excursions, and I'll lump ourselves into people that provide rental equipment, anybody who's in an online checkout flow for their product or their service. You can add an optional donation to your local conservation organization, and it's just a pass-through, and the for-profit company who's providing the service, then at the end of the season, maybe cuts a check to that nonprofit. That's an idea. And going back to this, I do feel that it's not very popular, but that we should have a parking pass that everyone pays locals, out-of-staters, whoever, if they want to, not a fee to use the public lands, but to park your car to use the public lands. I feel like it's a way that we can generate money for our public lands, and not necessarily philanthropy for conservation, but going back to that public land question.
Sure. Revenue generation for sure. Sarah, Racine, you have thoughts on this?
I would definitely agree with Gia. I think, the other space, particularly for those smaller conservation organizations, local, state-based, or, ours is a national organization. I think there's a lot of opportunity, particularly for smaller and niche organizations, to do things like raffles, and where businesses actually, like Gia's business, maybe donates a trip, and then that little organization gets to sell tickets to raffle off that trip. Like, it's a pretty simple thing, but I think particularly building the philanthropy for smaller conservation organizations really needs to come from within the community first. Like, you're not going to get a whole bunch of people to donate from Minnesota to some small little nonprofit at the very beginning, that's just based in Libby, Montana. So if you start at that community level, then, that's how you begin to build that small organization dollar amount, and then keep it moving up as you go. So it's starting small with those local organizations, and then moving bigger. Like, you can't just jump into $1 million fundraisers right away.
Sure. Yeah. Let's move to. Oh.
I was just going to say, I think community fundraising is hugely important, and this is a place where, frankly, City Club Missoula can be helpful, right? Do you, we're kind of, you have some of the bigger players here, but do you guys have a platform that could bring some of those other players here in northwestern Montana? We have a thing called the Great Fish Community Challenge, sponsored by the Whitefish Community Foundation. It's a wonderful opportunity for smaller organizations that don't have fundraising infrastructure to be able to have that infrastructure put in place for them. And I think those kind of community building things are great. And then for people who are fortunate, like we are, to have a reasonable amount of donors and some infrastructure, we're big believers in community fundraising. And that means that we partner with a bunch of other organizations. We partner with NPCA, right? We do things together. And I think that is a value that we should talk about openly, because it's too often too competitive in the fundraising business, right? And $1 for me doesn't mean $1 less shouldn't for the Glacier Institute or the Glacier Volunteer Associates or whomever. We ought to have a view that a rising tide floats all boats.
So let's move to a question about modeling good behavior. It's sort of looking at that question of resentment from a few moments ago and framing it in a more positive light. Frank Reed asks, he's wondering if panelists have any idea on how we can effectively encourage our own residents to model behavior we want from tourists to, quote, recreate more responsibly. There are so many Montana public lands outside the national park boundaries that are also under threat of being loved to death by our own friends and neighbors. How can we sort of model behavior by being more responsible ourselves? And does that appear to be effective in your view? I thought this question would be good for Racine to kick us off with, but she might be having some struggles with her audio at the moment. So Sarah, Gia, or Doug, you want to jump in and take that?
I mean, I think there's always opportunity for those of us that are locals to model good behavior just by how we're doing things, right? Like, I go out on the trail every weekend, if not multiple times a week, and what I do and how I act certainly can impact others. I think this is that space where education is really important, and doing more cross-jurisdictional or multi-jurisdictional education, so that Glacier National Park and the Flathead National Forest or the Lolo National Forest and Montana state parks and all of those are carrying the same message across the board, right? Like, let's not get confusing and make a different message for each land agency or for each public land management agency. So it's really about educating folks. It's about, locals modeling it. I think, to some extent, if they had more resources, it's also about enforcement. Sure. I think too often people think that they can just get away with doing whatever they want to on public lands because nobody's going to stop them. and they're not going to get in trouble for it. So I do think that there's some space there for that as well. But I think, I mean, I hike with a garbage bag everywhere I go, and I pick up every piece of garbage that I see. And that's like, if we all do that, then maybe that starts to change the behavior of other folks on the trail as well.
Sure.
I think it's a super challenging question, right? Because, you know, your son and his girlfriend are coming to visit and you want to take them on the Highline Trail. It's just the way it is, right? So you want to, you know, beat it up and you want to get your parking spot. And so it does take some deciding to think about that. I mean, just going to share very directly, when the ticketed entry system, Julie and I kind of talked about, okay, look, we have a trap line of trails we hike. Let's spend this year as if we didn't have access. And to be honest, it was a fabulous experience. We hiked, literally, again, we've been hiking here for 40 years. We hiked mostly trails we'd never hiked before. And there were no people on these trails, right? And so I think part of that for me is really starting to explore. I mean, there's I don't know, Sarah probably knows the number. There are tens of thousands of trails, miles of trails in the Flathead Valley alone. And there's plenty of place for all of us. And it is going to take, I mean, I now recommend, I tell people, go to Cobalt. I mean, it's an unbelievable, great hike. Or go to Medicine Grizzly out of Cut Bank. I mean, nobody's a Cut Bank. It's great. And we can do that without causing more damage all over the board. I mean, I think there's still a lot of shoulder here for us, but it does, you know, the questioner is exactly right. It takes thinking a little bit more about what your path is going to look like next weekend.
Racine, I don't know if you have good sound, but you were talking about how your organization emphasizes this recreate responsibly question. What sort of behaviors do you feel like are sticky in terms of responsible recreation that people maybe learn from your messaging that they carry over and model for others?
Frankly, we hear a lot of problems about leave no trace. People are just not packing in and packing out, everything along those lines. I think one of the big ones, and we would have never, ever imagined us having to tell people this, is to be kind and to be respectful and to be patient. I think the last couple of years, there's a lot of anxiety, and, you know, a lot of that is just, you know, encouraging people to embrace the rural way of life. And to respect that. But yeah, we really do concentrate on making sure people are respecting those natural resources, and also planning ahead, making sure they've got their reservations, making sure they are not doing things that are beyond their skill level, making sure they've got their bear spray, all of those kinds of things, because those are pretty inherent to us, but they're not so much to other people, but that's okay. We're here to help educate them.
Excellent. Let's move to a question from Rosie Goldich, who asks, how do your organizations or businesses balance Montana's tourism industry while working with local indigenous communities? How do you see that relationship developing, changing with Glacier National Parks increasing visitors or other visitorship throughout the region? Gia, I haven't heard from you in a moment. Would you like to jump in on this one?
Yeah, on our historical tours, we try to incorporate all aspects of Montana history, and that goes way back before we were all here. And so we try to have the trips where we have guest speakers incorporating that story into our story, or, you know, the story before us. So especially on the Missouri, the day trips around Missoula, you know, we do our best, but it's a short time we have with our guests, maybe 4 to 6 hours. But on the trips where we have 3 to 6 days, there is a lot of time for discussions and sharing of all aspects of our state history.
Super, thank you. Sarah,
Yeah,
Go ahead, Racine, or Sarah.
It's actually really, really important. We want to make sure that story is being told, and working with whether it's the private business owner who is a tribal member or whether it is the tribal government themselves, making sure, one, we are promoting the things that they want us to promote and not promoting things that they don't. And then also making sure that the Recreate Responsibly message is translating over to what is appropriate and what isn't on each of the different reservations, because that does vary. And so that's really, really important.
Yeah, I think one of the things we have to realize that sometimes we don't, when we think about impact to gateway communities, we think of Kalispell and Hungry Horse, and we don't necessarily think of Browning. And we should, because when they closed the gate at St. Mary, that's the closest town, right? And so there's an impact that we're not helping them deal with, or warning them, in fact, in some cases, that it might be coming. And so that's A, important. And then B, for us as an organization, we've included it in everything we do. And in that, we just think that it's a core value that we need to be thinking about this place in that holistic, as Gia said, the people who actually have been here for 10,000 years. And so we're doing our grants process with the park. Every grant request from the park has a question that says, is there an opportunity for partnership with the indigenous communities, tribal communities? Yes, no. If no, why not? If yes, how does that happen? Because again, we have to refigure our mind a little bit. Gateway community equals Browning. University and college equals Salish and Kootenai College and Blackfeet College. High school means Big Fork and Columbia Falls and Browning and Ronan. And so it is something that we have to get better at ingraining this in the communications we have with each other.
Super.
And as an organization, so thankfully we don't have to think too much about balancing Montana's tourism as an organization, since we're a conservation advocacy group as opposed to tourism group. And so we certainly, NPCA has partnered with both the Blackfeet and the Confederated Salish and Kootenai on lots of different things, lots of different projects around land preservation and conservation, clean water, clean air, things like that. But I think the other piece that we've been working on with the Park Service is priority hiring for Native people, as opposed to, what usually happens, like, let's make some preferences for places like Browning so that we're bringing jobs to the community as well. I also think it's about being respectful, and like, as we're talking about, we're hearing everybody talk about, like, go someplace new, try a different trail, all of those things. Like, as we're thinking about that, think about, is this a sacred space? Is this actually where I should be going? Maybe I should ask that question first. And I think that especially as we start talking about other opportunities and really advocating for other people to go other places than just national parks, or, I think that's a really, really important piece of the puzzle that we need to get out, is that we're not sending people to places that are culturally significant for Native Americans or tribal folk, because I think that we too easily forget that we weren't the only people here. And so we really do need to be aware, especially in places like the Southwest, but, here as well, like, maybe the Badger Sioux Medicine isn't the place to tell somebody to go. Maybe you should tell them to go someplace else on the National Forest instead. So I think there is that we also have to think about as we're talking about bringing people and telling people to go new places, is that we're being very sensitive to tribal homelands.
Super. Well, we're just about out of time, so I figured we could close with just an easy, non-controversial softball question for each of you. And that is from Richard King. Should Montana adopt a sales tax to increase the money available to accomplish the needs discussed previously? So something right down the middle. Doug, what do you think?
So Racine reminded me of a pet peeve of mine, which is that not all the bed tax money goes to bed tax purposes. So I'm going to say no, unless we have a very clear idea of where that money is going to go, right? The bed tax was intended to 100% go toward tourism. There was a minor problem with the general fund, so they redirected it for a couple of years. Judy Marks was governor, for those of you who remember that era, and it's never come back. So I think more taxes is just more taxes, unless one decides to think about where they're going to go very, very carefully, and whether they are a substitute for other things that already go somewhere else. So 100% personal opinion, by the way, and not related to my job.
Super. Gia, you want to go next?
I would love to defer to an economist, but I just, as a Montanan, and again, like Doug personally, I would just dig my heels in and say no, because once we go there, we can't ever go back. And I worry about, that it wouldn't relieve property taxes, and it wouldn't relieve the other taxes that are, are a concern for Montana residents. And so I say we have to find it somewhere else.
Sure. Okay. Sarah.
I'm going to put out right now, personal opinion here, not the opinion of our organization. I think it's a tough one. I don't think the answer is a sales tax. Just a straight across the board sales tax. I agree with Doug, unless you have a really clear space and like a really clear knowledge, and you have really clearly written laws about where that goes. I think the marijuana issue, legalizing marijuana, like you got a whole bunch of green groups supporting that because a lot of that tax dollar was supposed to go to conservation, to maintenance and things like that. And that is certainly not necessarily where it ended up going. So I think you have to be careful about things like that. That's why, again, as a private person, and agreeing with Gia about not just raising taxes to raise taxes, that's where the idea of something like a recreational year tax is probably a whole lot better idea, because then you're only paying it if you're buying something new to go use in the outdoors. That might be the way to go in the future. I'm not going to say that's necessarily true, but that's probably a far better choice than the straight sales tax.
Okay, Racine, you get the last word, but it's got to be quick because Brett's going to jump in and cut us off.
Well, I don't think it's the option right now. We're going into a surplus situation going into this next legislative session. I think there's going to be some interesting conversations around that. And again, why create a sales tax unless we know that there's going to be some relief somewhere else in either our income tax or our property tax. So personally, I don't think now is the time for sure.
Okay. With that, I'll turn it back to our fearless leader, Brett Rosenberg.
Cutting you off. Thanks, everyone. Doug, Racine, Sarah, Gia, and Justin, thanks so much for all you do and your participation in this very, very timely panel. Just to illustrate something happening just literally right out my back door here is that the city of Missoula has closed Waterworks Hill Trailhead and parking to revamp the access and make some trails more accessible. And so that's forced traffic farther up to the North Hills trailheads. And with the balsam leaf arrow roots starting to pop out today, that you can just see the people coming and going more and more, which it's very illustrative of everything you've spoken of on a very, very localized kind of level. But at any rate, thanks again, and to our audience for the great questions. You're the whole point we're here. Really appreciate it. And thank you to our sponsors, in particular, the University of Montana, First Security Bank, and Blackfoot Communications. We hope you can join us June 13th for our next forum entitled Grizzly Bears, List or Delist? That is the question. And after a 2-year hiatus, we will finally be back in person. So get one good last look at my dining room because you're not going to see it again for a while. We'll be at the DoubleTree, but please check our Facebook page for more information later in this week. And that should do it. Again, thanks everyone. And until next time, have a great day.